Howdy folks, welcome to episode 42 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. Woo! Felt like the Micro Machines guy for a second there. Anyways, this episode's a momentous occasion because this is the very first 3DS game ever for the series. Never thought that was going to happen. And by covering both handheld games, we have the entire main series of Animal Crossing under our belt now. So let me know what you thought at the end of the episode and hope you enjoy. Let's roll. So the first thing that we're going to look at is the opening sequence to Wild World, where Cap'n is driving you in a cab. Now normally the camera is very restricted in this area, but when we're allowed to take a look around, you can see that the environment is actually just two flat textures that bend a little bit to make it look like it's 3D. And the cab itself is of course in a somewhat diorama mode. Any place that you're not meant to see it doesn't exist. And much like in the City Folk episode, you can actually see Cap'n's dashboard figurine has a doubled up, and actually in this case tripled up texture of Cap'n himself. It's just plastered on the boat and out of the player's view. Next up is something that everybody had to let me know about. It is really cool. It's in New Leaf, and apparently if you turn the camera around in the mayor's office, you can see Tortimer on the computer's desktop. Now that is something glorious, but it should be noted that the developers didn't put in too much extra effort to make this happen. Because if you look very closely, it's actually the same picture as the one hanging on the back wall. And that's evidenced by the fact that even the frame of the picture is on this desktop. And next is the cab in Wild World, because we hardly ever get to see it in the game. First thing I want to do is do a spin around to see what it looks like at all angles, and as you can see, once again, it purposely leaves out textures on the opposite side that the player's not allowed to see. But I think there's a better question that's been looming on a lot of our minds, and that is, where does the cab go when it drives away? And what's really funny is that the cab doesn't quite escape from the purgatory that is Animal Crossing. It just kind of smashes into the side of the cliff. I guess that explains why we never see Cap'n ever again. Now, in the case of New Leaf, there wasn't a whole lot to see. This game is actually a very clean-made game. Not a lot of things hidden underneath objects, and still no viable way to do a nice attractive zoom out. But one thing that we can do is show you what's outside the boundaries of the game. So for starters, we're going to show you what is at the end of the ocean. And rather, there's nothing there at the end of the ocean, but at least you can see where it ends in general. What's actually really funny is that once you step outside the boundaries of the ocean, your character begins to walk again, which is kind of unusual because if there is a void, typically your character just falls right through. Alright, now in Wild World, we're checking out the gate. And as you probably know, if you've ever played Wild World, is that if you visit a friend's town, the gates will open and you see a character walk off into wherever, but you don't know where exactly he goes before he arrives at your friend's place. So if we take the camera behind the gate, we can see just how much of this environment is actually there. And honestly, it's not much. But what's really interesting is that in order to hide this environment, they made a black wall that goes above the doors. Whereas normally whenever you see the black void, it was just that, the void. But here, the developers had to create a black barrier so that the players couldn't see the outdoor environment on the other side. Okay, now back to New Leaf. As you remember the last time we were here, we went all the way to the end of the ocean. Now we're just working our way back up to the top of the map. And once you get all the way to the very end, you can see the bridge that the train runs on. Now, naturally, the question on everyone's mind is, how far does this bridge go? And so if we spin the camera around, we can see for ourselves. Back in Wild World, we're going to check out the northern tip for their town. And what's particularly interesting here is that the river actually has a triangle end, which is a bit surprising. You would imagine that it would just kind of be like the bridge where it just ends abruptly and then it's just the void. But no, in this game, they do things a little bit differently. Outside the player's view, they actually bookend it, even if the water surface doesn't reach all the way to the end. And what's also really interesting about Wild World is that the areas are segmented in chunks, kind of like how it would work in the GameCube version, except the culling works out the chunks in real time, so you don't have to worry about hitting the edge of a map and then moving on to the next square. And what's also cool about Wild World is that it has the most amount of grass outside of the boundaries. Although there's not a whole lot to look at, it's actually pretty surprising that you could fit a house on top of these cliffs, if the game allowed you to do so, of course. Okay, and now we're at the northern point of New Leaf. Here at the top you can see these little bushes, and you'll want to remind yourself of those in a little bit. And the path to the shops area has a little bit of stone pathway that you can't see otherwise. Because obviously if we go down, this is how it looks. So, in Wild World, there's a lot of unused textures, and they're all in the same exact spot, which is just above the doorway of every building. Well, just about every building. Here at the town hall, you can see a weird purple triangular pattern, which I imagine was supposed to be visible when you open the door and go inside. And over here at the museum, you can see a triangular pattern with grooves. very obviously meant to be seen from the bottom up. And special to the museum itself are textures that are resting on the ground as well. So now we're in the shopping district of New Leaf, and of course, this area is very restricted as well. But what's actually really interesting here is that if you go off the cliff, you can see that there's a whole extra layer of grass that for the most part can be walked on, except for when you get a little too close to the edge. Now this one's really interesting, but it's a little hard to show you guys what exactly is going on here. Basically, underneath the platform that KK Slider plays on is a sheet of textures that is used in this room. Now the unfortunate thing about this is that the space in between the stage and these textures is so narrow that taking the camera underneath makes it really difficult to show you exactly how these textures look, but essentially what's underneath here is the textures for the door that's over by Brewster and his mini fridge. You can also find the texture for his cash register. Now, a lot of you haven't played Wild World in many years, so I'm going to take the camera over to the original model so that you can see a comparison. Alright, now we're at the train station. There's two notable things to mention here. Now, remember when I told you to keep those two bushes in the back of your mind? Well, here at the train station, if we angle the camera, we can see that those bushes are always in winter mode. Now, they can never be seen by the player normally, so the developers never made those bushes act in real time. And the other thing to mention here is that there's a trash can hidden behind the locker. This is something that you can kind of see as the player, but naturally, it's mostly skewed behind this locker. So turning the camera around gives us a much better look at it. Now in Wild World, we're at the Observatory, and there's two things to mention here. One is that the telescope that is pointed out into the sky actually has a hole that you can see through, despite the fact that you would never be able to see that as the player. And also with some angling, you can see that behind the desk is another texture for the star chart. There's also textures for the vanilla book that's on top of the desk, among other tiny things, but the most visible one to see right now is the star chart. Now, since we answered this in the last Animal Crossing episode, I figured that we'd confirm or debunk whether or not Mr. Rossetti has feet in the other two Animal Crossing games. And if we take the camera below, we can see that no, he doesn't in Wild World, and no, he doesn't in New Leaf. Which is a little bit surprising to me because I know that he has feet when you visit him in his underground headquarters. Now we're checking out the homes in HHS. And sorry for the weird camera angle, it's a little more difficult to control the camera in New Leaf, but one thing that this camera is really good for is panning. And so if we pan the camera way past the original area, you can actually see that there's multiple lots for houses that are completely unused. And if you keep going further and further, you can find more and more lots. Or is that what's really happening here? The more likely guess is that we're running around on a cone, and every time we meet a full rotation, we see the ground for that cone, but the models are stuck somewhere. Speaking of cones, let's do a zoom out of Animal Crossing Wild World and get a better look at the cylinder town that you walk on. Now I want to take this time to thank YouTuber and hacker Super Stario. Without his help, I would have never been able to add Mario Kart DS to my last Mario Kart episode, and he made this amazing code for Wild World because I asked him. So I'm going to leave a link to his channel in the iCard in the upper right, and if you could, just leave him a thank you in one of his videos. Super Stario, you're the man. Thank you. And for the last area in New Leaf, we're going to take a look at the campground. Someone wanted to see if there's anything inside of the log cabin, and if we take the camera over there, we can see that no, there's really nothing there. Beneath it is more of the deck, where the items are displayed, but unfortunately there's really not much else to see. I also want to take this time to thank Rydoginator. This is the man responsible for the camera in New Leaf, among many other hacks. And I was very thankful that he approached me about using his hack for this episode. Rydoginator, you made so many people happy just now, and I really appreciate that you made this hack. Maybe we can work together to cover even more 3DS games? Let me know, man. Alright, I'm going to leave a link to his Twitter account in the description down below. Alright guys, that was the Wild World and New Leaf episode. I know a lot of you guys were asking about it back when I made the original Animal Crossing episode. I think more people were concerned about New Leaf than anything else, so I'm super duper happy to finally be able to give you a Boundary Break episode on New Leaf. I think we can bring back democracy this week.
Democracy!
Yeah, for real this time.
Are we sure?
We're really sure this time. So this time it's going to be a choice between Xenoblade Chronicles or Halo. Pat's pretty convinced that it's going to be Xenoblade this week. So
I want in.
I think he's going to vote on this one. Anyways, guys, that's the episode. If you want to see prior episodes, maybe you missed one, you could have missed an episode, or you want to suggest an episode, it could be in the playlist.
That box right
Yes,
there.
I always mention it, and I know that you guys are probably so tired of me saying it, but it's really important that you check out the playlist because you may have an episode you want to see, and it's already there. There's 42 episodes now that you can select from, and just cherry pick your favorite. All right, guys, take care. Love ya. Bye.
Toodles, Internet.